Patricia Winters stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed, iPhone clutched in her right hand like a weapon. Her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line as she watched the young couple across the street unload a U-Haul truck. The husband, tall with tattoos snaking up both arms, hoisted a worn leather couch while his wife directed him toward their new front door. Patricia's eyes narrowed. The couch was clearly secondhand. That simply wouldn't do in Oakwood Estates. "Honey, did you see what they're bringing into the Johnsons' old place?" Patricia called over her shoulder, not taking her eyes off the scene. Her husband, Richard, grunted noncommittally from somewhere inside their pristine colonial. He had learned years ago that engaging only prolonged these moments. Patricia tapped her French manicured nails against her phone case, already composing the text she would send to the other HOA board members. As treasurer of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, Patricia considered neighborhood surveillance her sacred duty. And these newcomers, with their U-Haul instead of professional movers and their obviously discount furniture, were already raising several red flags. The young woman across the street caught Patricia staring and offered a tentative wave. Patricia didn't wave back. Instead, she lifted her phone and snapped a photo, making sure it was obvious what she was doing. The woman's friendly smile faltered. Patricia felt the familiar surge of satisfaction. 3 days later, Patricia strode purposefully into the community center meeting room, clutching a leather portfolio embossed with the Oakwood Estates logo. The quarterly HOA meeting was about to begin, and she had prepared extensively. Behind her, homeowners filed in reluctantly, exchanging knowing glances. HOA meetings under Patricia's watch were notoriously long and confrontational. "Let's begin with new business," Patricia announced after the perfunctory reading of minutes. "I've documented 17 violations since our last meeting." She slid glossy photos across the table toward the other board members. The Hendersons in Unit 47 installed unapproved solar lighting. The Garcias have a basketball hoop visible from the street. And our newest residents, she paused dramatically, have already violated 6 different bylaws, including unauthorized external paint color, non-regulation window treatments, and a porch swing that doesn't conform to our aesthetic guidelines. Greg Wilson, a retired accountant who served as board secretary, sighed audibly. "Patricia, they just moved in. Don't you think we should give them a chance to settle before bombarding them with violation notices?" Patricia's expression hardened. "Rules exist for a reason, Greg. Property values don't maintain themselves." She shuffled her papers meaningfully. "I've already drafted the warning letters." The new couple, Aiden and Maya Rodriguez, received their first HOA violation notice before they'd even finished unpacking. 3 more followed in the next 2 weeks. Patricia made sure each one referenced the relevant bylaw section and included her personal cell number for questions or concerns. When Maya called, voice shaking slightly, asking about a 6-month grace period mentioned in the welcome packet, Patricia cut her off. That provision was revised last quarter. If you had attended the meeting, you would know that. "But we haven't even closed on the house yet," Maya protested. "Not my problem," Patricia replied coolly before hanging up. By month's end, Patricia had established a routine. Each morning, she walked the neighborhood with her Yorkshire Terrier, Winston, smartphone ready to document infractions. Afternoons were dedicated to drafting violation notices and researching property values. Evenings often found her parked in her SUV, monitoring the comings and goings of suspicious vehicles. When the Rodriguez family dared to host a backyard barbecue that extended past the 8 p.m. noise curfew, Patricia didn't hesitate. She marched across the street in her silk pajamas and monogrammed robe, phone already dialing the non-emergency police line. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance," she said loudly enough for the partygoers to hear. "Excessive noise and possible code violations at 427 Oakwood Drive." The music stopped. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned to Patricia, standing triumphantly at the edge of their property, Winston tucked under one arm, righteous indignation radiating from every pore. What Patricia didn't notice was Aiden Rodriguez quietly activating his phone's camera, capturing every word of her complaint. She had no idea that her reign of terror was about to face its first real challenge. 2 police officers arrived 15 minutes later, clearly uncomfortable with the call. Officer Jenkins, a veteran with salt and pepper hair, took in the scene with a practiced eye. Families gathered around patio tables, children playing tag in the yard, a grill sending up the last wisps of smoke. Nothing resembling the wild disturbance that had been reported. Patricia marched over, Winston still tucked under her arm like a furry accessory. "Officers, thank you for coming so promptly. As I explained on the phone, these people are violating multiple community ordinances." Officer Jenkins glanced at his watch. "Ma'am, it's 8:17 p.m. on a Saturday." "Exactly. Our HOA bylaws clearly state that outdoor gatherings must conclude by 8 p.m. sharp." Patricia produced a laminated copy of the relevant page from her robe pocket. thrusting it toward the officers. Section 12, paragraph 3, subsection B. The younger officer suppressed a smile while Aiden Rodriguez approached, hand extended. Officers, I'm Aiden. This is my wife, Maya. We're hosting a housewarming with our family. We were just wrapping up. Maya stood beside her husband, visibly embarrassed. We're so sorry for the trouble. Most of our guests are leaving now. Patricia cut in sharply. That's not the only violation. Their string lights aren't approved. The grill is too close to the property line. In fact, she pointed accusingly at a colorful piñata hanging from a tree branch. It's definitely not on the approved outdoor decoration list. Officer Jenkins sighed. Ma'am, HOA violations aren't police matters. We respond to noise complaints, but I'm not hearing anything excessive. You should have heard them 20 minutes ago, Patricia insisted. And technically, they're trespassing on HOA common property by using that strip of grass beyond their fence line. Aiden's polite expression tightened. That's actually within our property boundaries. I checked the survey when we purchased. Impossible, Patricia snapped. I've been on the board for 7 years. I know exactly where. I have the property survey right inside, Aiden interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Would you like to see it? Something in his tone made Patricia hesitate. Behind her, several neighbors had emerged from their homes watching the confrontation unfold. Patricia was accustomed to an audience during her enforcement efforts, but something felt different this time. She noticed Greg Wilson, the board secretary, among the onlookers, shaking his head in apparent disapproval. The younger officer cleared his throat. Unless there's an actual disturbance, we'll be on our way. But they're breaking rules, Patricia protested. HOA rules aren't laws, ma'am, Officer Jenkins explained patiently. This is a civil matter between you and your neighbors. As the officers turned to leave, Patricia felt her control slipping. This wasn't how these situations typically played out. Usually, a visit from authorities was enough to send rule breakers scrambling to comply. The Rodriguez family, however, seemed unintimidated. I'll have you know I'm documenting everything, Patricia announced, raising her phone to take more photos. The board will review these violations at our next meeting. Aiden stepped forward, his own phone still recording. Please feel free to document whenever you like from public property or your own yard. But I'd appreciate if you'd stop trespassing on our property to do so. I am not trespassing. As a board member, I have the right to inspect. Not without notice, you don't, Maya interjected, finding her voice. We read the bylaws thoroughly before moving in. Section 7 states board members must provide 48 hours written notice before property inspections. Patricia's mouth opened and closed without sound. These people had actually read the bylaws. In 7 years, no one had ever challenged her knowledge of the very rules she wielded so effectively. Well, she sputtered, this isn't an official inspection. I'm simply observing obvious violations visible from common areas. From our backyard, Aiden asked pointedly, which you entered without permission? The watching neighbors murmured. Patricia suddenly realized how this looked. She straightened her robe with as much dignity as she could muster. You'll be hearing from the board, she said coldly, turning to leave. Looking forward to it, Aiden replied with unexpected warmth. In fact, I've been meaning to get more involved in community governance. I was thinking of running for a board position myself. Patricia froze mid-step. Board elections were next month. She had run unopposed for 3 consecutive terms. You can't just join the board, she said, turning back. Members need to demonstrate commitment to community standards. The emergency HOA board meeting Patricia convened the following Tuesday evening was unprecedented. In all of her years of service, she had never felt the need to gather the board outside their quarterly schedule, but desperate times called for desperate measures. This is an existential threat to everything we've built, Patricia declared, pacing the community center meeting room. The 3 other board members, Greg Wilson, Janice Parker, and Howard Collins, watched her with varying degrees of concern. These Rodriguez people are deliberately undermining our authority. Howard, a retired corporate lawyer who served as the board's legal advisor, cleared his throat. Patricia, from what you've described, they're simply exercising their rights as homeowners. Patricia stopped pacing. Whose side are you on, Howard? You saw the photos I sent. Unapproved porch furniture, non-regulation mailbox color, excessive garden ornaments. Minor infractions at best, Greg interjected, adjusting his glasses. And they've addressed several of them already. Maya emailed me this morning with photos of the changes they've made. Patricia's eyes narrowed. They contacted you directly? That's completely inappropriate. All violations go through me. Actually, Janice said softly, the bylaws don't specify a single point of contact. Any board member can receive compliance updates. As the newest board member, Janice rarely contradicted Patricia, making her input now particularly stinging. That's not how we do things here, Patricia snapped. And now he's running for the board. An obvious ploy to dismantle our standards. Next thing you know, they'll be pushing for backyard chickens and front yard vegetable gardens. She shuddered at the thought. Greg exchanged glances with Howard. About that, I've been thinking we should revisit some of our more restrictive policies. Times change, and perhaps our regulations should evolve too. Patricia stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. Several homeowners have asked for updates, Howard added. The solar panel restrictions, for instance, are increasingly out of step with other communities, and the ban on native plant landscaping seems counterproductive given the water conservation benefits. This is exactly what the Rodriguez family wants, Patricia exclaimed. They move in and immediately start corrupting everything that makes Oakwood Estates special. Janice spoke up again. I've met Maya at the community pool. She seems lovely. She mentioned Aiden works in urban planning and has experience with sustainable community development. Patricia felt the ground shifting beneath her. For years, the board had followed her lead without question. Now they were entertaining ideas from newcomers who hadn't even received their welcome fruit basket yet. Not that Patricia had arranged one for the Rodriguez family. We need to present a united front, Patricia insisted. The annual meeting is in 3 weeks. If we show any weakness, others will follow the Rodriguez example. Next thing you know, we'll have inflatable holiday decorations and RVs parked in driveways. Howard tapped his pen against his legal pad. Perhaps we should invite Aiden to join us for an informal discussion before the annual meeting. Get to know his ideas. Absolutely not, Patricia said firmly. That would legitimize his candidacy. He doesn't need our legitimization, Greg pointed out. Any homeowner in good standing can run. And from what I gather, he's already gained considerable support. Patricia's jaw tightened. This was worse than she thought. Who exactly is supporting him? Greg hesitated. Well, the Thompsons from Oakwood Circle, the Paddles from Elmwood Lane, the Goldsteins, the Clarks. The Clarks? Patricia was incredulous. Barbara Clark heads our landscaping committee. Apparently her son wants to install a basketball hoop, Janice explained. He's on the high school team and they've been denied 3 times. Patricia fought to maintain her composure. A basketball hoop would destroy the aesthetic harmony of their cul-de-sac. Howard closed his notebook decisively. I think we should meet with Aiden Rodriguez. Hear him out. Perhaps there's middle ground to be found. As the meeting adjourned with no firm resolution, Patricia lingered, straightening chairs. She needed a new strategy. Direct confrontation wasn't working. She needed to understand her opponent better to defeat him. The next morning, Patricia positioned herself in her home office window, which offered a clear view of the Rodriguez house. When Aiden left for work at precisely 7:45 a.m., she made her move. Dressed in her power-walking outfit with Winston on his designer leash, she set out on a route that would take her past several key neighbors. Barbara Clark was watering her immaculate roses when Patricia approached. Barbara, just the person I wanted to see. I've been thinking about your son. Sunday afternoon arrived with perfect weather, sunny skies, gentle breeze, temperature in the mid-70s. Ideal conditions for an outdoor neighborhood gathering. Patricia observed the preparations from behind her living room curtains, watching as Aiden set up folding chairs in their backyard while Maya arranged refreshments on a table. They didn't file a form for this gathering, Patricia muttered to Richard, who was attempting to read the Sunday paper in peace. Section 14 clearly states that any gathering of more than 10 non-resident guests requires prior board approval. Richard lowered his paper with a sigh. Patty, maybe it's time to let this go. You've been obsessing over these people for weeks now. I am protecting our community standards, Patricia replied stiffly. Someone has to. Richard studied his wife of 30 years, recognizing the determined set of her jaw. Just don't do anything. Extreme. Patricia's research into the Rodriguez family had yielded disappointingly little. Their mortgage was in good standing. Their credit was impeccable. Aiden's background in urban planning and Maya's career as a pediatric nurse were both legitimate and impressive. Their property taxes were paid in full. Even their previous residents showed no HOA violations or disputes. But Patricia had found one small nugget. Their home purchase had been contingent on approval for a home office conversion of their 3rd bedroom, documented in an addendum to their closing paperwork. That approval had come from the city, not the HOA. And according to Oakwood Estates bylaws, home-based businesses required board approval they had never sought. Patricia had spent 3 days drafting and redrafting a violation notice, carefully wording it to maximize impact. She planned to deliver it personally at the most opportune moment. By 3 o'clock, the Rodriguez backyard was filled with neighbors. Patricia recognized most of the faces, including, to her dismay, all 3 of her fellow board members. Greg Wilson was engaged in animated conversation with Aiden near the grill. Howard Collins sat in a circle with several neighbors Patricia had previously cited for violations. Even Janice Parker was there, helping Maya distribute drinks. Patricia smoothed her designer dress, checked her hair in the hallway mirror, and tucked the official-looking envelope into her purse. "I'm going to make an appearance," she announced to Richard, who merely nodded without looking up from his paper. The conversations quieted noticeably as Patricia entered the Rodriguez backyard through the side gate. Maya spotted her first surprise evident on her face before she composed herself into a polite smile. "Patricia, welcome," Maya said, approaching with a glass of lemonade. "We're so glad you could join us." Patricia accepted the drink with a tight smile. "I wouldn't miss an opportunity to hear what's being discussed about our community." Maya nodded toward a group of chairs. "Aiden's just about to share some ideas for community enhancements. Please, find a seat." Patricia chose a chair at the edge of the gathering, taking careful note of who was present and who was noticeably absent. Most of Oakwood's most rule-abiding residents, her natural constituents, had apparently declined to attend. Aiden moved to the center of the group, thanking everyone for coming. Patricia had to admit, reluctantly, that he had a natural charisma. Tall and articulate, with an easy smile that seemed genuine, he commanded attention without appearing to demand it. "I believe Oakwood Estates can be both beautiful and livable," Aiden began. "Both structured and flexible, both consistent and innovative." Heads nodded around the circle. Patricia gripped her lemonade glass tighter. "What if our HOA became known not just for what we restrict, but for what we enable?" Aiden continued. "What if we were the neighborhood that supported solar energy while maintaining aesthetic standards? What if we allowed children to play basketball in their driveways during daylight hours? What if we permitted native plant gardens that save water while still requiring neat borders and regular maintenance?" The positive response from the gathered neighbors was unmistakable. Patricia felt her opening slipping away as Aiden outlined a vision of Oakwood Estates that sounded reasonable and appealing. She needed to act before he completely won them over. "And what about home businesses?" Patricia asked loudly, cutting across Aiden's explanation of sustainable landscaping options. All eyes turned to her. "Where do you stand on residents using their homes for commercial purposes?" Aiden seemed unperturbed by the interruption. "Great question, Patricia. With more people working remotely, I think we need sensible guidelines that allow home offices while preventing disruptions like excessive deliveries or client traffic." Patricia retreated from the Rodriguez gathering with as much dignity as she could muster, her face burning with humiliation. She hadn't felt this way since 7th grade when Becky Miller had exposed Patricia's crush on Mr. Cooper in front of the entire cafeteria. The sensation was foreign and deeply uncomfortable. Patricia Winters did not lose, and she certainly did not get publicly embarrassed. "How did it go?" Richard asked when she slammed the front door behind her. One look at her face answered his question. "Ah, that well. They've turned everyone against me," Patricia hissed, dropping her purse on the entryway table with enough force to make Winston scurry for cover. "After everything I've done for this community." Richard muted the baseball game and regarded his wife carefully. "Patty, have you considered that maybe some of your approaches have been a bit intense?" Patricia whirled on him. "Whose side are you on?" "Yours always," he said calmly, "which is why I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for a different strategy. You've been the neighborhood enforcer for 7 years. Maybe let someone else be the bad guy for a while, and watch everything we've built crumble." Patricia moved to the window, staring daggers at the continuing gathering across the street. Absolutely not. For 3 days following the neighborhood meeting, Patricia kept to herself, declining her usual morning patrol and canceling her standing lunch with the ladies of Oakwood's social group. Instead, she spent hours in her home office reviewing HOA financial records, meeting minutes, and violation histories. If she couldn't win through direct confrontation, she would find another way. On Wednesday afternoon, she emerged with a plan. The quarterly HOA fees were due on Friday. As treasurer, Patricia was responsible for processing payments and documenting delinquencies. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Thursday morning found Patricia once again walking Winston around the neighborhood, stopping to chat with neighbors who still favored her strict oversight. By afternoon, she had quietly recruited a small coalition of like-minded homeowners who shared her concern about declining standards. "The annual meeting is next week," Patricia reminded Elaine Fisher, whose immaculate landscaping had won the Community Garden Award 3 years running. "If enough of us attend and vote together, we can ensure responsible leadership continues." Elaine nodded seriously. "I'll spread the word to our street. No one wants to see property values drop because of lax enforcement." Back home, Patricia sent a carefully worded email to the entire board, ostensibly about routine treasurer business. Buried in the middle was a seemingly innocuous request for approval to send immediate default notices to any homeowners whose quarterly dues weren't received by Friday's deadline to ensure fiscal responsibility during this transitional period. Greg Wilson was the only one to question the departure from their usual practice of allowing a 5-day grace period, but Howard and Janice, distracted by other matters, approved the motion. Patricia had her authorization. On Friday, Patricia stationed herself by the community mailbox at 3 p.m., when the mail carrier typically arrived. She exchanged pleasantries with neighbors collecting their mail, noting who did and didn't drop envelopes into the HOA payment box mounted nearby. By 5 p.m., she had tallied the payments. 14 households hadn't yet submitted their dues, including the Rodriguez family. Saturday morning, Patricia personally delivered default notices to all 14 households, saving the Rodriguez home for last. The bright red payment delinquent header was visible through the envelope's window, ensuring maximum impact when the notice was spotted in mailboxes or, in the Rodriguez case, ticked prominently to their front door while they were out. The notice indicated that delinquent members would have their voting privileges suspended until payment was received and properly processed, which, according to the fine print Patricia had added, could take up to 10 business days. Conveniently, this would extend beyond next Saturday's annual meeting and board election. By Sunday morning, most of the delinquent households had hurriedly submitted their payments either online or by dropping checks in the designated box at Patricia's house. The Rodriguez family, however, had not. Patricia was enjoying her second cup of coffee on the porch, savoring this small victory, when Aiden Rodriguez approached her house. He was carrying a printout and wearing an expression of controlled frustration. "Good morning, Patricia," he said, stopping at the bottom of her porch steps. "I wanted to discuss this notice you left on our door." Patricia smiled pleasantly. "Just a standard reminder. Quarterly dues were due Friday. We mailed our check on Wednesday." "He's bluffing," Patricia insisted, pacing her kitchen while Richard sat at the island, looking more concerned than she'd seen him in years. "He can't possibly have traced everything." "Patty," Richard said quietly, "exactly how much HOA money have you redirected?" Patricia stopped pacing. "Don't use that word. I've been underpaid for my services to this community for years. The hours I spend maintaining standards, processing paperwork, organizing community events, it's practically a full-time job." "That doesn't answer my question." She wigged dismissively. "Nothing significant. Small adjustments to various budget items. A few vendor overcharges that I processed through my personal account first." Richard pinched the bridge of his nose. "We need to talk to a lawyer. Today? And admit guilt?" Patricia scoffed. "Absolutely not. I'm going to handle this myself." But as Monday evening approached, Patricia's confidence wavered. She'd spent the day calling in favors, reaching out to every ally she had in Oakwood Estates. Few returned her calls. Those who could seem oddly distant, making excuses to end the conversations quickly. By 4 p.m., she realized the Rodriguez family's allegations had already spread through the community grapevine. At 6:45 p.m., Patricia sat in her car outside the community center, watching board members arrive for the emergency financial meeting. She had declined to bring the HOA's financial records as requested, claiming they needed to be properly audited first. It was a delaying tactic that sounded reasonable but would give her time to cover her tracks. As she finally entered the meeting room at exactly 7 p.m., Patricia was surprised to find not just the board members, but also a man in a suit she didn't recognize. The stranger was setting up a laptop at the head of the conference table. "Patricia, thank you for joining us," Greg said with unusual formality. "This is Marcus Daniels, a certified forensic accountant. The board has retained him to review our financial position." Patricia felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "That's completely unnecessary and a waste of HOA funds." "Actually," Howard interjected, "Mr. Daniels has volunteered his services pro bono, as he's Janice's brother-in-law and has experience with HOA financial reviews." Patricia took her usual seat, noting with dismay that someone had placed a treasurer nameplate in front of it, as if anyone needed reminding of her role. Aiden Rodriguez sat on the opposite side of the table, a folder of documents in front of him. He nodded politely but didn't speak. "As I explained on the phone," Patricia began, "I was unable to bring the complete financial records on such short notice. Proper accounting protocols must be followed." Marcus Daniels cleared his throat. "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Winters. The board has provided me with bank statements, vendor contracts, and payment records from the past 2 years. I spent the day conducting a preliminary review." Patricia felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. Those records were not authorized for release without treasurer approval. Section 9 in the bylaws allows any 2 board officers to authorize financial review in extraordinary circumstances, Greg cited without consulting any documents. "Howard and I signed the authorization this morning." "I prepared a preliminary report," Marcus continued as if there had been no interruption. He distributed printed copies to everyone at the table. "While a more thorough audit will be necessary, my initial findings indicate systematic discrepancies between reported expenses and actual expenditures." Tuesday morning brought unwelcome clarity to Patricia's situation. Jim Harlow, Richard's college friend and now their attorney, sat across from them at their dining room table, reviewing financial documents with methodical precision. his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he made occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. Based on what you've provided and what you've told me, Jim said finally, we're looking at approximately $32,000 in misappropriated funds over a 3-year period. Patricia flinched at the word misappropriated, but remained silent. The good news, if we can call it that, Jim continued, is that this amount is low enough that we might be able to avoid criminal charges if you act decisively. The bad news is that restitution will be necessary, along with your immediate resignation from the board. Restitution? Patricia repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. You mean I have to pay it all back? Jim nodded, with interest, and probably penalties. It's either that or face potential felony embezzlement charges. Richard placed his hand over Patricia's. We could liquidate some investments. Maybe take a second mortgage if necessary. Patricia pulled her hand away. This is beyond humiliating. It's called accountability, Jim said bluntly, and you should be grateful for the opportunity. Many clients in your position don't get the chance to make amends before charges are filed. As Jim outlined their proposed approach, full cooperation, immediate resignation, complete restitution, Patricia found herself struggling to focus. Through the dining room window, she could see her neighbor Carol Peterson walking her poodle past the house. Carol glanced toward Patricia's home, then quickly averted her eyes and hurried along. Word was spreading. I need to draft a formal resignation letter for you, Jim was saying, and we'll need to prepare a statement acknowledging the financial irregularities without specifically admitting to criminal intent. When will all this be public? Patricia asked. It already is in a sense, Jim replied. Small communities have efficient information networks, but officially, nothing needs to be disclosed beyond the board and membership until the audit is complete. And the annual meeting? Richard asked. Jim shook his head. Patricia should not attend. Her presence would only inflame the situation. The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork and hushed phone calls. Patricia signed documents without fully reading them, trusting Richard and Jim to protect her interests while she retreated into a numb state of disbelief. How did things unravel so completely in just a few days? By Wednesday morning, Patricia had composed herself enough to face the rescheduled board meeting. Against Jim's advice, she insisted on delivering her resignation in person. I've been the face of this board for 7 years, she told Richard as they drove the short distance to the community center. I refused to slink away like a criminal. Technically speaking, Richard muttered, but didn't finish the sentence. The meeting room was more crowded than Patricia had anticipated. Not only were all 4 board members present, but Marcus Daniels had returned with additional documentation, and 2 other residents were seated in the back as observers, a right rarely exercised for regular board meetings. Patricia approached the table with rehearsed dignity, placing her resignation letter in front of Greg Wilson before taking her usual seat one last time. Before we begin, she said, her voice steadier than she felt, I want to acknowledge that certain financial discrepancies have come to light during my tenure as treasurer. Howard raised an eyebrow at this passive construction but didn't interrupt. While I maintain that many of these expenditures were legitimate operational costs that simply lacked proper documentation, Patricia continued, I recognize that my record-keeping has not met the standards our community deserves. Greg glanced at the resignation letter but didn't open it. Patricia, we appreciate you coming in person. The board has prepared a resolution regarding this situation.